Hello everyone, this is BB, and you're at my channel, Encrypted Ritual. Just really quick before I get started, this is going to be part 1 of 3 for a series I'm doing on making eyes for dolls or other crafting projects. And this part can be standalone if you want it to be, so I'm going to do this part from start to finish, and then the other 2 segments will be making a mold and then casting from that mold with resin. So the first part is going to be making your bases, which I'll be making with Sculpey today, which is a polymer clay, but you can use paper clay as well for this project. The only other thing that you will need if you're only doing bases is either a silicone mold for baking, and that's just to get to get you started. And I'll be showing you how to make the dome for the inside of the eye where you'll be decorating or painting. But I prefer the silicone because you can bend them to pop out your clay. But you can also use a measuring spoon of the proper size if you have that instead. You'll just need like a piece of saran wrap or something to help you pop out the clay when you're ready. And then if you are going to be doing this from start to finish and just using the Sculpey or paper clay for your eyes, you will need a varnish to make a shine on the outer part of the eye, as well as to dome them. So you can use the varnish to both dome and shine, although you'll have to layer up on the inside of the eye if you're using just a varnish. Or you can get a crafting, like a UV resin that's just like a one part like this. You can buy some of them at craft stores, otherwise you can get them online. And that's something that you just like put in a window or under a UV lamp for a few minutes until that hardens. So yeah, so I'm going to show you the first part, which is making the Sculpey base, and also basically how they would look finished if you make them with clay rather than going all the way to the end and making the resin. So enjoy part 1. I hope that this helps some of you. Thanks.
Alright, so starting out, basically, as I mentioned, I used the silicone mold, and I took the pieces you saw me put in to use to make the domes were 2 halves of a circle of clay that I had cut in half, but you can also use the smaller domes within the mold to make them as well, which I showed. So I put those on the inside of the mold, upside down, to create the dome of the eye, and then I put the Sculpey in, and as you can see, I pretty much smooth them out as I pull them out. The other option is also, if you have anything with a rounded tip, you can use that as well to make the domes as well. So after that, I bake the Sculpey eyes, and once they have baked, usually 20 to 25 minutes, I then sand the bottoms, and I also sand the top to just make sure everything is pretty much softened, and I go over it with a rougher piece of sanding paper, and then later on towards the end I like to go back over it with a higher smoother grit. But I spend a lot of time on this part of the process. This is actually where I spend the most time. I actually ended up cutting the video after this segment and working on these for a few more hours, and I probably could have worked on them even more beyond that. But if you are making molds, it's good to spend a lot of time really making sure that the eyes are as perfect as you want them to be. Um, so it's just something that's good to keep in mind. Um, and yeah, so I use a variety of files. I have both regular, I think, steel and then diamond files, which are these tiny ones that I was using there. And the black paper is the finer sanding paper, which I use at the very end. The the tinier files are really great when it comes to sculpting in general, and if you are working on making sculpts of your own, because otherwise it is just so hard to get in there and do tiny details. So before I go on to the next step, I usually just wipe them down with either like a soap and water mixture, and then rinse them, or just with some rubbing alcohol. So that's what I'm doing here, just before I get to painting. It just makes sure that I get all of the dust off, and that everything is pretty much clean and ready to go. Um, I've also heard, although I am not entirely sure, that once you've baked Sculpey and other polymer clays, that it like the because it changes from soft to hard, that the chemicals change, and so it's better to wash them because it just makes everything adhere a little easier. I don't know um, the science behind that, but that's just what I've heard. So yeah, at this point, if you were doing your molds, you would put the varnish on, but since we're doing the whole thing here, I'm moving straight to painting. So with these, I ended up just putting down a base coat on camera, and then I did a bunch of smaller details off camera afterward, before I move on to the embellishments. But like generally, what you want to do when you're painting your eyes is you want to start either. I would prefer starting with a lighter color, whether you're working with watercolors or acrylic, and then add the darks, and then you can add some highlights on at the end if you need to. But for me, that's just the easiest way to layer. But you'll figure out whatever works best for you. And yeah, so I pretty much just did those, and then I set them to dry overnight, and then I came back to it to finish the following day. And so when I'm starting to, like, before I add the little like embellishments and sparkles, I like to take some of the Pearl X pigments, which are what makes the shimmer, and we'll wipe the insides of the eyes with a Q-tip with it. And when you add whether you add a varnish or whether you add resin to seal them, like it will like make them more clear again. So even though it looks like a lot of them are like you can't see what I've painted, like you would see it later on. So after that, I start putting in, for some of them I put in pupils, others I just put in like little sparkles or like little rhinestones like I showed. For the pupils on the first two, I used like just little micro beads. I am eventually gonna either get some half-backed black pupils, or I will just make some maybe with resin. But sorry, I started pulling off the screen and I didn't even realize it. But I just basically continued to put the rhinestones in. On the eyes that look kind of like the reddish pink, I ended up actually pulling out the rhinestones and trying to do just hearts. But they are actually one of the only pairs that I don't like how in the very end they turned out. So yeah, that said, I did want to mention, once these are all set and done, I will be giving the 5 pairs that I did like away. So I believe that the smaller are 12 millimeters, so there's 2 pairs of those. There's 3 pairs, so there will be 2 pairs then also of the 14 millimeters, since I'm getting rid of the pink ones. And then, or I'll be using them for another project, I should say. And then the larger ones are, I believe they're either 20 or 22 millimeters. I will double check that before I post the info on the video. But yeah, so I just, continued moving on with this. I normally, actually, I would say half the time I end up painting the pupils on, but for these, I ended up just doing the rhinestones. I especially liked the ones that have the blue with the pink. They're actually my favorite set. But so yeah, that's what they looked like for the most part. And then at the end, we put in the UV resin. I went a little overboard with the first 2, but I managed to save them. And so you just put them down the row one at a time. If there are bubbles, which there were in a few of these, you can always take a lighter and run the lighter over the top, and that should get rid of the bubbles. I did not do that for these, so a couple of them do have some minor bubbles, but they still looked nice in the end. And so then finishing up, after the resin has cured on the eyes, then I go back and I use the varnish, and I just I go over with a couple layers. So I just showed the first layer because that's really the most important part. And you just let that dry, and then you put down another layer like 2 or 3 hours later. If you want, I usually do 2 or 3 layers for mine. You want to give them time to dry, or they will fog. That is one thing that will happen with the varnish. But yeah, so that is pretty much what the tutorial was. So I hope that this was helpful. If you aren't looking to make a ton of eyes, really the Sculpey way is just way easier than having to make your own mold and do all of that. So again, I hope this helped, and I hope that the video will, inspire you to make some of your own eyes. If you want to see more things like this, please, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think, and we'll get better at voiceovers eventually. I tried to squeeze this in as best I could. But yeah, alright, I will see you guys around in the next one. Bye-bye. Just wanted to make a quick note that I added on the eyes that are available and numbered them 1 through 5, so they'll be available first come, first serve, and I'll have more details below in the info. Thanks again, everyone, for watching.